113 BCE, the air is heavy inside ancient Rome's sacred temple grounds. A woman named Marcia is screaming as workers lower a thick stone slab over the mouth of her underground tomb. The grinding sound of rock against rock echoes through the chamber, then silence. Total darkness. She's still breathing, still conscious. But what's about to happen to her is far worse than death. By the end of this story, you'll understand why this punishment, being buried alive, was considered so psychologically devastating that Roman historians spent centuries trying to erase it from record. You'll see how long these women actually survived underground, and the numbers will chill you. You'll also learn who was secretly watching through a small hole in the tomb and what Renaissance workers found nearly 1,500 years later when they accidentally broke into one of these sealed chambers. The position of the skeleton inside told them everything about her final moments. This is the untold story of Rome's holiest women, the Vestal Virgins, and the nightmare punishment designed exclusively for them. If you're drawn to the dark truths of history, subscribe now to Unchained Stories, because these are the stories that textbooks bury, and next week's episode is even worse. But first, let's start with the question that defies logic. Why would Rome bury its most sacred women alive? Picture this. You're walking through ancient Rome. The streets are alive with merchants, senators, soldiers. And then the crowd parts. 6 women glide through in flowing white robes, their braided hair wrapped like crowns. The people bow. Even the emperor lowers his head. These are the Vestal Virgins, priestesses chosen to serve the goddess Vesta, protector of Rome's eternal flame. For 30 years, they live apart from society, guarded, honored, almost divine. Their duty? To keep the sacred fire burning forever. Because Romans believed if that flame ever died, so would Rome. But that divine power came with an unthinkable price. Chosen as children, some as young as 6, they swore an oath of absolute chastity. Their purity wasn't symbolic, it was survival. Rome believed its destiny was tied directly to their virginity. If disaster struck, a plague, an earthquake, a lost war, the people whispered, a Vestal must have broken her vow. And if she did, if even one was accused, Rome unleashed a punishment so cold, so deliberate, that even its architects called it the most sacred form of execution. The Romans called it the Campus Sceleratus, the field of evil. It wasn't outside the city walls like other executions. It was right inside Rome, hidden in plain sight. Now here's the twisted part. Roman law forbade spilling a Vestal's blood. No one could stab her, whip her, or hang her. So the priests found a loophole. They wouldn't kill her. They'd just seal her underground and let nature do the rest. But don't mistake that for mercy. They knew exactly what would happen in that chamber, and they planned every detail with ritual precision. The year is 113 BCE. 3 Vestals, Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia, are accused of breaking their vows. The evidence? A meteor shower. Yes, meteors. Lightning struck a temple. Maybe there was an earthquake. Roman priests, the augurs, read these signs and declared the gods were angry. No witnesses, no proof, just bad weather and fear. Plutarch, the Greek historian, records how panic swept Rome. Armies were losing battles. Senators were desperate. The public wanted someone to blame, and the easiest scapegoats were the women who symbolized Rome's purity. And so, the ritual began. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, arrives at the house of the Vestals. He faces the accused and recites the words no Vestal could ever hear without trembling. I judge you guilty of incest. You are no longer a Vestal Virgin. In that instant, her identity, her protection, her holiness, all vanish. She's now impure, stripped of her divine role. To the Romans, she's not even human anymore. They lift her into a covered litter, a closed wooden box carried by slaves, so no one can see her face. The people line the streets silent. No mourning, no prayers, no sound, but the shuffle of feet and the muffled breathing of the woman inside. You can imagine it. Inside that box, pitch black, swaying with each step, she can hear the city she once protected. The city that now condemns her. The procession winds through the forum, through marble arches past temples she once tended, until it reaches that cursed patch of ground, the Campus Celeratus. There, a pit has already been dug. 12 feet deep, marble walls, cold and white. A small couch, a table, a lamp. A few crumbs of bread and a flask of water. Rome called it mercy, a room prepared for her comfort. They open the litter. The Pontifex helps her step out, never touching her, because she's now ritually unclean. He lowers his eyes as she descends the ladder into her own tomb. Then the priests perform the final act. They hand her the food, the oil, the lamp, symbols of life. Then they climb out. The soldiers roll the stone slab across the opening. The grinding sound echoes again. Darkness. The air grows thin. And as the last flicker of light disappears through that narrow crack, 1,000 citizens stand in silence above her, listening. No one speaks. No one breathes. Rome has sealed its sacred daughter beneath the earth. What happened next, how long she lived, what she did in those final hours, would be lost for centuries. Until, in 1485, workers digging near the ancient walls broke through a hidden chamber. What they found inside, and how her body was positioned, told them everything about the terror of her final moments. But that journey is for part 2. The guards help her descend the ladder, slowly, carefully, into the pit that will become her tomb. The light above flickers against the white marble walls. She steps down the last rung. Her bare feet touch the cold stone floor. The guards don't meet her eyes. They climb out. And that's when the real psychological torture begins. Don't scroll away, because what they place in that chamber with her reveals how calculated, how scientific, how deliberate this cruelty really was. According to Pliny the Elder, who wrote disturbingly detailed accounts of Roman execution rituals, the priests placed 5 specific objects in the tomb before sealing it shut: a single loaf of bread, a small jug of water, a container of milk, a cup of oil, and 1 tiny oil lamp already lit. You understand what that means, right? They're not killing her. They're extending her death, giving her just enough to survive, not to live, but to prolong the suffering. Because technically, Roman law forbids spilling a Vestal's blood. The priests could argue, we didn't kill her, we just left her in a room with some supplies, so let's do the math. That oil lamp, with the amount of oil provided, burns for about 4 to 6 hours. When it goes out, the chamber goes pitch black, underground black. The kind of darkness where you can't see your own hand an inch from your face. If she's smart, if she's disciplined, she'll ration the bread and water. 2, maybe 3 days worth. Enough to stay conscious. Enough to keep breathing. Enough to stretch the agony. But here's where it turns from cruel to mathematically horrifying. That tomb, sealed with a heavy stone slab, contains about 90 to 100 cubic meters of air. A human being consumes around half a cubic meter of oxygen per day at rest. But she's not resting. She's terrified. She's hyperventilating. Her heart is pounding. So in reality, she has maybe 48 to 72 hours of breathable air at most. Now picture it, you're down there, alone. The lamp is your only light, your only sanity. You ration the oil drop by drop. You take a bite of bread. You sip the water. You whisper to yourself, they'll realize it's a mistake. They'll come back. Someone will open the stone. Then above you, footsteps, voices, chanting. They're not coming to rescue you. They're performing the ritual of consecration, turning the ground above your tomb into sacred soil, ensuring that no one will ever dig here again. The footsteps fade, the voices vanish, and now it's just you, your breathing, your heartbeat, the flickering of that tiny flame. When the lamp finally sputters out, it's not just darkness, it's a kind of silence that eats sound itself. Now here's the part most people miss. Pliny mentions that there was a small breathing hole, a narrow shaft, maybe 4 inches wide, cut through the stone to the surface. Not large enough to escape, not even large enough to shout through, but sound could travel down, and that's exactly what the priests used it for. Some sources claim they would kneel at the hole and listen, checking whether the woman was still alive. In their words, to know when the gods have claimed her. Translation: when the screaming stopped. But don't go yet, because what one of these women did in her final hours changed everything. In 337 BC, a Vestal named Marcia was accused and buried alive. The historian Livy documented her case for one haunting reason. Years later, when her tomb was opened for religious inspection, what they found inside shocked Rome. The marble walls were covered in scratch marks, deep, deliberate gouges made by fingernails. Some were at the base of the slab, others scattered across the walls, like she'd been feeling blindly through the dark, searching for a way out. But one detail haunted everyone who saw it. Some of the scratches formed patterns, lines, possibly words. Too eroded to read by the time Livy's sources saw them, she had tried to write something, to leave a message. Think about that. You're trapped underground. The lamp's gone out. You can feel the air thinning, the carbon dioxide burning your lungs. Every breath hurts. Your heartbeat is slowing. You know you're dying. So what do you do with your last moments of consciousness? Some Vestals prayed. Some curled up on the couch and waited for death. But Marcia fought back. With her fingernails, she carved her truth into the stone. Maybe her innocence. Maybe the name of her accuser. Maybe just, I was here. I existed. I mattered. Livy says her case caused a massive uproar in Rome, not because people felt pity, but because of what her scratches implied. They proved she had survived for at least 3 full days before losing consciousness. And some senators argued if the gods truly wanted her dead, she would have died instantly. That meant maybe she was innocent, and that argument led to a policy change so chilling it's hard to comprehend. The Senate decreed that future Vestal burials should include less food and water, only a symbolic amount, because they didn't want the women surviving long enough to create religious complications. You see what that means, right? They weren't just punishing impurity. They were optimizing the horror, and that's the part no history book will tell you about. Rome's so-called merciful deaths, they were engineered, perfected to make sure mercy never came. Archaeologists and historians later uncovered evidence suggesting that at least one woman, one Vestal, survived the full oxygen depletion cycle and didn't die from suffocation. She died of dehydration. That can take up to 10 days. How do we know? Because of what Renaissance workers discovered in 1485, when they accidentally broke into one of those long-forgotten tombs. And I need to warn you, this next part stays with you. Picture it. The year is 1485. Rome is booming again. The Renaissance has breathed new life into the ancient city. Laborers are digging foundation trenches for a new palazzo, near where the Campus Celeratus, the field of the accursed, once stood. 14 centuries have passed since the last Vestal Virgin was buried alive. No one even remembers this place existed. A worker's shovel hits something hard, stone. They assume it's old Roman ruins. This city is layered with them. But as they brush away the dirt, they realize this isn't just foundation work. It's a sealed marble chamber, perfectly intact, untouched since the day it was closed. The foreman hesitates, then makes a decision that will haunt history. He orders the seal broken, according to contemporary letters, especially one written by the Roman scholar Pomponio Leto. Here's what they found inside. A skeleton, still draped in decayed threads of fabric, lying face down on the floor directly in front of the sealed entrance. Not resting on the couch, not collapsed along the side wall. She was right there, at the door, arms stretched upward, fingers clawing toward the stone. She died trying to push the slab open, but here's the detail that turned this discovery into legend. Her skeletal fingertips were wedged into a half-inch gap between the door and the frame. She'd found the tiniest space where the marble didn't seal flush and tried to pry it open. Think about that. A marble slab that size weighs 300 to 400 pounds. One starving, oxygen-deprived woman can't move that. She knew that, but she tried anyway. So ask yourself, what would you do? When your lamp burns out and the darkness becomes complete. When the air turns heavy and every breath burns like drowning. When you know no one is coming to save you, do you surrender? Or do you spend your last moments fighting the physics of your own execution? She fought, and that act of defiance would ignite something powerful centuries later. When Renaissance humanists heard about the tomb, they started digging, not into the ground but into the old Roman archives. They wanted to know who she was, what she'd been accused of, whether she was even guilty. What they found shocked them. Across dozens of documented Vestal burials, the pattern was undeniable. The accusations always came during political crises, after military defeats or public scandals. Whenever powerful men needed a scapegoat, they pointed at the women who symbolized Rome's purity. The evidence? Omens, meteor showers, earthquakes, or the testimony of enslaved people tortured until they said exactly what prosecutors demanded. Take the 113 BCE triple burial, the one I told you about earlier. Historians now believe it was never about divine punishment. It was a political distraction, orchestrated to cover up a wave of Senate corruption scandals. Or look at 83 CE, the last known live burial under Emperor Domitian. The accused Vestal's name was Cornelia. Domitian himself charged her with impurity, possibly because she had refused a political marriage proposal involving his niece. When the Vestal's chief priestess dared to speak in Cornelia's defense, Domitian exiled her on the spot. They buried Cornelia alive anyway. But that act of cruelty broke something in Rome. The citizens turned on him. Even the Senate began quietly resisting his orders. 14 years later, Domitian was assassinated by his own court officials, and afterward, the Senate passed a formal decree. Never again shall a Vestal Virgin be buried alive. Just like that, after more than 1,000 years of terror, the marble tombs of the Vestals finally fell silent. Today, if you visit Rome, you can walk right across the ground where the Campus Celeratus once lay. It's just a quiet little park near the Quirinal Hill now. Tourists take photos. Locals walk their dogs. There's no plaque, no memorial, nothing to remind anyone that women once screamed beneath this very earth while the city carried on above them. But they were there, and the scratch marks carved into the marble proved they didn't go quietly. For more than a millennium, Rome used the threat of live burial to control its holiest and most powerful women. The Vestal Virgins had wealth, influence, and legal protections no other women in the empire enjoyed. But that power came at a cost. A lifetime of fear, because in ancient Rome purity wasn't protection. It was a weapon, one accusation, one rumor, one storm, one omen, one political enemy, and you could find yourself climbing down that ladder into the marble room where light never returns. They called it a merciful execution, because technically no one laid a hand on them. They just sealed a door and walked away. But we know better. We've seen the scratch marks. We've done the oxygen math. We've read the desperate messages carved into stone, and the truth is, mercy had nothing to do with it, because even now, centuries later, the pattern survives, the fear, the control, the false accusations, just dressed in different clothing. The methods changed. The psychology didn't, and somewhere deep under modern Rome, the air is still thick with the memory of those women who refused to die quietly. Power has always found a way to disguise itself as morality. And when those in control wanted obedience, they weaponized virtue, turning purity, shame, and fear into tools of domination. The Vestals weren't Rome's sinners. They were its saints. But Rome buried them alive anyway. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. Across history, we've seen the same story repeat itself. Women condemned, humiliated, or destroyed for violating purity standards that men themselves invented. What does that say about who these laws were really designed to protect, and who they were built to control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if this story opened your eyes to how dark justice could really be, then make sure you're subscribed to Unchained Stories, because next week we're going even deeper. I'm covering the Roman execution where the victim had to help carry out their own death. An execution so psychologically twisted, the mind broke long before the body did. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you in the next one.